Hello, flute players, and welcome to another edition of Stage Etiquette. In this particular video, I'm going to cover the issue of being prepared. Seems very self-explanatory, but it's so important, these basic life skills really, especially for freelancers. I've done a whole series, or I have on a playlist here on YouTube, of different topics on basic stage etiquette that I would highly recommend to check out if you're in the freelancer scene, because it's also important, as important or almost more important than your actual playing. The first issue is to be on time. And again, this is a basic life skill. It should be obvious, but it's just absolutely not an option to be late for rehearsals or concerts, of course, in the music world. It's just not accepted. If you're, again, like in a full-time orchestra and you're a member, you have more leeway. You might get in trouble or something, but you're not going to risk never being called in that orchestra again because you're a member. So this is just another example of why it's especially important for freelancers to do these, to take care of these little things. So being on time, of course, means be early. Things you have to consider, especially if you're driving a long distance, which is very common. I remember having to plan 4 hours just to get from Chicago to Indiana, somewhere in Indiana for a gig, or up to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or whatever, especially in the winter with the snow. You know, you have all these things. You have to plan your route. You need to look on Google Maps, Apple Maps, and see if there's what the traffic's like at that particular time, and give yourself extra time. You need to make sure that you have gas in your car, or that you've accounted for time to get gas, you know, all these little details. But when I think back on what I did to get to a gig, I did all these things. Know where you're parking, especially, this is especially true if you're driving into a big city like New York City or Chicago. You have to make sure and plan, like get on Spot Hero and reserve street parking somewhere or in a parking garage. You just have to think about it. You can't just drive in, and because you could spend half hour to an hour looking for parking in a big city, and that's not an exaggeration. So you just have to plan in advance to be able to arrive at your gig on time. So that is half the battle, finding your gig and getting there on time. The next big thing in being prepared is, of course, preparing your music, your actual music, having practiced it, especially, of course, if it's a big program like a classics program. Even also like a pops concert, some people, you just don't want to blow that off like, oh, it's just a pops concert. At least at the minimum, make sure you get your music, if possible. I mean, sometimes you're called in last minute to sight read, and there's nothing you can do about that. But if you are called within the time to get your music and look at it, do that. Even if it's just a pops concert or some light, casual, program, you never ever know what's going to be in your folder. There could be like a tin whistle solo for like an Irish jig piece or something, and that'll be put in the piccolo part. Or you might be expected to play it on tin whistle. There might be an alto flute measure, and you'll have to make sure to bring your alto flute. It looks really bad if you show up to a rehearsal and in your part is alto flute and you did not bring your alto flute. It's just very revealing that you did not even crack open your folder. And that reflects, it's just, you're not in huge trouble or whatever, but it's something that's remembered about you for when they think, like if you're in the section and the principal flute is thinking about hiring you for the future, it's just gonna make an impression that you weren't prepared. And then, of course, if it's a big program like a classics program or masterworks, whatever the orchestra may call it, then of course you actually need to probably practice all the big passages or whatever. Another thing to consider, and this maybe is going back with either way, I was gonna say just pops, but it could be either way, is make sure you have your page turns worked out. In a full-time orchestra, I've seen this happen all the time as I've played in those type orchestras as a sub, and first rehearsal and somebody won't make a passage and they'll just say, oh, sorry, I have a page turn, and the librarian will take care of that for them. They're just, they don't do anything themselves. So a freelancer, though, when you're freelancing in, or even as a member of like a regional orchestra, you're still kind of considered a freelancer, you need to take care of that yourself. And it should be done ahead of the first rehearsal. So that's all part of being prepared. So when you show up to the first rehearsal, if you have a bad page turn, you need to have copied the page that you need to turn and tape it up there, or handwrite out the few notes that you need so that you don't have to make the page turn, whatever. So you don't want to show up as a sub or a freelancer anywhere and not be able to play something simply because you couldn't do the page turn, because again, that gives the impression that you didn't even look at the music, or you're kind of blowing it off. Either way, that leaves a very bad impression. So it shows that you're not prepared, or maybe you just don't care. And so there's like a million gazillion other flute players that can be hired that do care. My process for preparing for a first rehearsal or preparing for a week of concerts, if it's a big program, like a big classic program, is getting the music, of course, and practicing my part as best I can. I listen to a recording with my part. That is very, very helpful. And then if I have time, what's also extremely helpful is to play my part along with a recording, or the movements where I'm not sure. That's very, very helpful. And then you'll feel very comfortable in the first rehearsal. So things will be revealed when you play along with the recording, like, oh, I play with the trumpet comes in one measure early before I do, and then I come in. So you have that, just knowing that is, it'll help prevent miscounting or whatever. Or you might realize, oh, in this passage here, I'm not with the rest of the flute section, or my part is completely independent of the rest of the winds. And you realize that stuff ahead of time and not at the first rehearsal. It's just very helpful. So that's a great way to be prepared, not only just practicing your own part, by itself, but then listening to a recording while watching your part go by, and then also playing along with the recording is a great way to prepare. This one stage etiquette topic of being prepared, like I mentioned in the beginning, is just as important as being able to play your part, like being a great flute player, a great piccolo player. All the stage etiquette topics that I've covered in my series so far, in my opinion, from my experience of decades of being a freelancer, is that just as important or more important than your playing ability. It really, truly is. So you could be the greatest flute player in the world, but if you don't show up on time, you simply won't be hired back again. I mean, that's just probably the worst thing you could do, is not being there on time. If you show that you're not prepared, it's obvious. It's not like you can't play a passage yet. That's not the issue, because you can practice and you might not have it all the way up to tempo yet, or that's fine. That's just being a human being. But if it's very obvious that you didn't even crack open your folder, you didn't even make any kind of effort to be prepared, because it's not just about you. You have an entire orchestra or band trying to work out other ensemble issues, dynamics and balance and whatnot. There's no time to deal with one person who just didn't have their part ready to go. So that reflects very poorly on you. And then based on just that, that's very probable that you would not be called again to sub in that orchestra or play that particular gig again. Like I said, I'll link in my playlist of all the other stage etiquette videos I've done so far. Please check them out. I think they will be very helpful for you. If you like this video, you found it useful, if you're a freelancer, for sure hit subscribe, and then you will be in the loop for future videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.